Hi, I'm Ivy. And at my husband's will reading, my own family snickered, called me the maid who got lucky. They turned my grief into a meme, mocked my silence, laughed like I was invisible. But they didn't know. Walter had one more thing to say, and when the screen lit up, everything they thought they stole came back to me, tenfold. Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this, and where from? Because sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones who bury you while smiling. I held Walter's hat close to my chest as I walked through the tall glass doors of the law office. Savannah had a way of feeling humid, even in grief, and the sky outside was smudged gray, like it couldn't make up its mind whether to mourn with me or not. Inside, the air was cooler, still, quiet in the way of places where people try not to say the wrong thing. I wasn't early, but I wasn't late either. Yet all the front row seats were already taken. There they sat, Walter's children from his first marriage. A perfect little row of polished shoes and pressed collars. Hannah, his eldest, was adjusting her pearl earrings while whispering to the cousin beside her. I caught a glance, sharp, amused. Then her hand reached to her leather purse, and with a flick of her wrist, she nudged it over the only open chair in the row. No words. Just a silent claim. You don't belong here. I stood. The lawyer gave me a slight nod as I entered, but didn't rise. He didn't have to. I wasn't the one anyone had come here for. At least, that's how they saw it. I'd been Walter's wife for 13 years. 13 quiet years. But you'd think I'd been a weekend guest they barely remembered. I smiled faintly at Walter's brother Louis, sitting in the second row. We'd once shared laughs over coffee at the porch, but now he looked away like I'd reminded him of something he didn't want to recall. From behind, a voice chirped, light, sugary. Ma'am? Would you like some coffee? I turned. It was Rachel, Walter's granddaughter. I used to babysit her, back when her parents were too busy posing for success. I remembered her giggle at age 6 when she helped me frost cupcakes. Now she looked at me like I was a receptionist. I'm all right, sweetheart, I said softly. She smiled politely, but her eyes already moved past me. I could have been a ghost. The lawyer tapped his file folder and began, his tone flat and rehearsed. To my children, Hannah, Craig, and Dana. He read out names like a grocery list. Coastal properties in Tybee Island, a 2-story home in Hilton Head, an Audi, a check for $150,000, a lake cabin. Each name was met with small, smug nods. Craig even whistled under his breath. I stood silently in the aisle. The room had shifted into something colder than air conditioning. And to my wife, Ivy, the lawyer began, but he never got to finish. Hannah stood up, arms folded, one hip cocked like she was on a runway instead of in mourning. Let me guess, she said, voice loud enough for the back row to hear. He left you the birdhouse and a poem, right? How sweet. A ripple of laughter spread, tight, rehearsed. Someone muttered, she probably got to him when he was on morphine. Another voice added, he always was too sentimental. I didn't respond. I didn't look up. I just gripped the rim of Walter's hat, the brim digging gently into my palm. I'd worn beige so I wouldn't stand out. Now I realized I didn't have to worry. No one was ever going to let me shine here. The lawyer cleared his throat. May I finish, please? He said, more firmly this time. The room quieted. I kept staring at a spot on the carpet. A thread was coming loose. Probably hadn't been vacuumed right. Funny the things you notice when people are trying to erase you in real time. Behind my stillness, my thoughts curled around something Walter had whispered in his hospital bed, barely audible under the oxygen mask. Don't let them erase you, Ivy. Back then, I thought he meant emotionally. Don't let them ignore your grief. Now I wasn't so sure. I lifted my gaze, just enough to meet Hannah's eyes. She looked smug, victorious, like she'd just taken something away from me before I even opened the gift. And then the lawyer adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat again, and said 7 words that silenced the entire room. The lawyer's voice didn't tremble, but something in the air shifted when he spoke. I leave everything. To my wife, Ivy Eddington. It took me a moment to register what he'd said. I must have heard wrong. Everything. Not a portion, not a token gesture, not a carefully worded in her care until the children clause. I blinked. The walls of the room didn't fall, but it felt like the oxygen had. For a split second, no one moved. No one breathed. All that existed was the dry rasp of those 7 words hanging between us like fog before a thunderstorm. Then it hit. "What the hell?" Craig, Walter's only son, shot to his feet. The polished wood of the table rang with the slap of his palm. "This is a joke, right? He was on heavy meds, confused out of his mind." "Sit down," the lawyer said, his tone clipped, not cruel, but firm, like a man who had seen this scene play out too many times. Hannah's chair screeched backward as she rose next. "He wasn't thinking clearly. You took advantage of a dying man. You preyed on his guilt." "She seduced him," someone muttered from the back row. Maybe Dana's husband, the one who always looked like he'd rather be golfing. My ears buzzed, but I stayed frozen. I didn't flinch. My fingers pressed deeper into the rim of Walter's old hat, still warm from my hands, as if that threadbare felt could ground me in something real. The lawyer turned another page in the will with deliberate calm. The estate, business interests, home, and family trust were signed over to Mrs. Eddington over a year ago. All documents were witnessed and notarized in full compliance with Georgia state law. I looked down, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't know where else to look. I could feel all of them watching me, waiting for a twitch, a tear, a smirk. I gave them nothing. They didn't understand that I was just as shocked as they were. Walter had told me he updated his will. But not like this. Not everything. "Unbelievable," Craig growled. His eyes locked on mine. "You're not blood. You're not family. You were a distraction. A filler after Mom died." I raised my chin slowly. "I loved your father." It was the first thing I'd said all morning. My voice didn't shake, but it was low. Too quiet for rage, too raw for defense. "No," Hannah spat, stepping closer. "You loved his money, his last name, his house. You played caretaker to a man who couldn't see straight." I turned toward her, still calm, still holding that brim like a rosary. "You think that man could be fooled?" I asked. "Do you honestly believe he didn't know exactly who each of us was?" The room tensed. The lawyer cleared his throat and stepped between us. "You are all free to file a legal objection," he said, "but you should know the documents have already passed pre-probate review. Contestation will not alter the current standing of the estate." Craig gave a short, breathy laugh, no joy in it. From behind my stillness, a memory rose like a tide. Walter, sitting in the hospital recliner, hooked to his IV, his eyes clearer than I'd seen them in weeks. He'd reached into his leather folder, hands trembling, and pulled out the signed documents. "Ivy," he said, "they don't want you. They never did. They don't even want each other. What they want is control." I remembered shaking my head, asking him to please leave something for the children. A small home, a bond, something to ease the tension after he was gone. But he had touched my face, kissed my forehead, and said, "I'm leaving them nothing they didn't already throw away." I'd cried in the hallway that night. Alone. Now, the silence had shifted into something more dangerous. Craig reached for his coat, his jaw tight. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "You think you can play queen of the castle? You've got no idea who you're dealing with." "I'm not playing anything," I replied, softer than he expected. "I buried the man I loved 4 days ago. I didn't come here to win." But Craig wasn't listening. He was already storming past the rows of relatives, his sister close behind. Their heels clacked with finality. Walter's brother gave me one last look. I couldn't tell if it was sympathy or guilt, or maybe just confusion at how it all ended up here. Soon the chairs were empty. The room quiet again. I sat, finally. My knees creaked, and I felt every one of my 62 years. I laid Walter's hat gently on the table and exhaled through my nose, not in relief, not in triumph, just overwhelmed. My hands were trembling now. The lawyer closed his file folder and stood. Mrs. Eddington will handle all filings from this end, but I would recommend you stay in touch with a personal estate attorney for the next 90 days. I nodded. After he left, I sat alone for a while. The walls didn't look so cold anymore, maybe just tired. I pulled out my phone to call a cab, and that's when the first email came through. Subject line, urgent, probate objection filing from the Eddington children. I didn't even get my coat off before the second email arrived. The first had just been a subject line, cold, clinical, but loud enough to echo in my chest. The second, not so polite. Legal action forthcoming, you had no right. Then a third popped up before I could even delete the first two. Hope you enjoyed your 15 minutes. Because we're taking it all back. Attached to that one was a message from Craig. No greeting, no punctuation, just one sentence. You were a blip. This empire is ours. For a moment, I just stood there in the front hall of my house. Walter's old coat was still hanging on the hook by the door. I reached out, almost without thinking, and brushed my hand across the wool sleeve. He used to keep cough drops in the pocket, spearmint ones. I closed my eyes. They weren't wasting time. Just hours after the will reading, they were already setting fires. I slipped off my shoes and walked deeper into the house, the weight of that final email dragging behind me like a wet coat. The living room was dark except for the dim light from the hallway, and Walter's study door was still closed, untouched since the funeral. I hadn't been ready to go in there. Until now. I stepped inside and flipped on the lamp. His desk was still neat. That man never let clutter gather. But the filing cabinet next to it, tall, dented in the back, one drawer that always stuck, was another story. That was where he tucked away the things no one was supposed to see. I crossed the room, knelt down, and opened the bottom drawer. Tax records. Manuals. Letters from charities. I thumbed through folders labeled Q4, Hold, and Deferred Ledger, Craig, Review. The handwriting in that last one made my pulse quicken. Then I saw it. Tucked flat against the back of the drawer, nearly hidden behind a thick manila envelope, was a smaller white one. It had my name in bold black pen. Open if they come after you. I stared at it for a moment, then pulled it out gently and sat down at the desk. Inside was a stack of papers. Ledger printouts. Statements. Handwritten notes in Walter's tidy script. And next to those, a flash drive taped inside the flap. The first page was dated 6 years ago. It listed a withdrawal. $14,200 from one of the estate's brokerage accounts. Next to it, in Walter's handwriting, Craig, unexplained purchase, no board approval. The next page showed Hannah's name. Another transfer, this time to a private account out of state. I claimed reimbursement for fundraiser supplies, no receipts. I kept turning pages. Transaction after transaction, quiet theft, a pattern. He knew. Walter knew the whole time. He'd tracked every dollar they took, every account they moved funds through. He never confronted them, but he never looked away either, and I'd never asked. I laid the documents down, palms flat on the cool desk surface, trying to breathe around the knot building in my chest. Then I saw the second envelope, this one thicker, slightly yellowed. On the front, in the same hand, for Ivy, read alone. I opened it slowly. Inside was a folded letter. His handwriting was familiar, smoother than mine, measured, like everything he did. If you're reading this, they've come for what they think belongs to them. They will say you manipulated me. They will swear I was confused, but I wasn't. I was tired of pretending they hadn't already abandoned me. They stopped being children a long time ago. But they never started being adults. You, Ivy, you gave me peace. They gave me demands. You gave me comfort. They gave me court threats, staff turnover, disappearing money. I never wanted to leave you with a fight, but I knew I had to give you the tools to win one. Protect what matters. Don't let their noise drown out your voice. You see clearer than they ever have. My legacy doesn't need their name on it. It needs your heart behind it. I love you. By the time I reached the last line, I was shaking. I hadn't cried at the hospital. I didn't sob at the gravesite. I held it together when Hannah called me a parasite. But now, holding that letter, I broke. Not loudly, just tears running down without warning, falling onto the edge of the paper like little stamps. He'd left me the burden, but he'd also left me the armor. I sat there a long time, the desk lamp casting a soft circle of light, the hallway still quiet. Somewhere down the street, I could hear the faint sound of a car door slamming. Life was still happening out there. But in here, something was changing. I looked around the room, not as the widow, not as the outsider, but as the woman he'd trusted to finish what he couldn't. I wiped my face, folded the letter back with care, and placed it into the lockbox Walter always kept in the cabinet drawer. I pressed the latch down firmly. It clicked with finality. Then I pulled out my phone. I scrolled through old contacts until I found the one I needed. Benjamin Katz, Eddington Legal. I hit call. It rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Ivy?" he asked, surprised. "You okay?" "I need to ask you something," I said. "Do you still have power of attorney documentation from Walter on file?" There was a pause on the line. "I do," he said. "Actually, Walter updated it 6 months before he passed, named you as sole executor for both the estate and the corporate structure." I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. Not relief, not triumph, just confirmation. He'd known exactly what he was doing. And the next morning, I walked into Eddington Holdings, not as the widow, but as the CEO. The moment I stepped into the elevator of Eddington Holdings, there was a quietness to me that no one could rattle. I'd barely slept, but something deeper than rest steadied me. Walter's key still worked. The elevator chimed, and as the doors slid open, I stepped out onto the 28th floor, straight-backed, navy suit pressed crisp, heels silent on polished tile. It was the suit Walter once teased made me look like a senator. I wore it for him, but this time, not as a partner, as a protector. The receptionist looked up, startled. She stood halfway before blinking nervously. "Mrs. Eddington, I was told. Your access." I held up the official packet. Notarized letters, the sealed executor's certification, and Walter's signed instructions. Her mouth closed. "I'd like you to let the board know I've arrived," I said, gently but firm. "They're expecting me, even if they don't know it yet." She hesitated, then nodded. It was 8:42 a.m. I stood there waiting. The hallway air felt colder than usual. Either the AC was working too hard, or the building had started freezing me out already. Finally, the doors at the end of the hall opened. A tall man in a charcoal suit appeared. Martin Lawford, Eddington Holdings' longest-serving board member, approached me slowly, arms crossed. "Ivy," he said carefully, "you're here early." I gave a faint smile. No such thing as early when the company is under siege. He didn't respond, just gestured toward the boardroom. The doors were already open, and there they were. Craig, lounging in the chair at the far end, sleeves rolled like he was still playing executive. Hannah perched beside him, lips pursed, fake pearls too tight at the collar. They didn't say a word when I entered. Craig leaned back, arms crossed. Hannah shifted like she smelled something bad. "This isn't some bridge club, Ivy," she finally said. I walked past her and calmly placed one printed folder in front of each board member. "No, this is a corporation, one your father trusted me to protect, from you." Craig let out a dry laugh. "You've got a lot of nerve." I met his eyes. "No, what I have is legal authority." I turned toward the group. "These are Walter's instructions, signed and dated 3 months before his passing. In the event of his incapacitation or death, he appointed me acting chair, not as a figurehead, as leadership." Martin opened his folder first, his brow furrowed. Others followed. Silence. Then a voice, soft but clear, from near the middle of the table. "Why, would Walter make this decision without consulting the board?" I turned slowly, grounding myself. "Because he knew if he did, someone here would leak it," I said. "And Craig and Hannah would tear the foundation out before the ink dried." Craig stood abruptly, sending his chair scraping. I won't sit here and let her trash our names. You'll sit, Martin said quietly, because until this is resolved legally, she holds the gavel. Acting chair has final say. The room froze, Craig's jaw locked. But he sat. It was the first time I'd ever seen him obey a voice other than his own. I opened my leather folio. If anyone's curious why Walter made this choice, I brought a timeline. I laid down a slim set of papers in the center. You'll find a pattern of unauthorized withdrawals, silent transfers, shell entities billed through consulting accounts, 6 years' worth. All signed off under Craig and Hannah's oversight. I paused, then looked up. I'm not accusing anyone today, not here, but Walter believed in accountability. And I don't think he died trying to preserve something just for it to rot under our watch. Hannah's mouth opened, but no words came. I went on, voice steady, firm. If this is how Eddington Holdings is remembered, I'll resign, right here. But if you're willing to rebuild what Walter envisioned, I'll stay, and I'll lead. One of the older women near the window leaned forward slightly, then gave a quiet nod. Across the room, a whisper passed between two members. She's not just a placeholder. She came prepared. I stood still, not triumphant, but grounded. Walter had once told me the board would never follow someone unless they bled for the place. I wasn't here to bleed. I was here to protect. The meeting ended without applause. Just silence. Controlled tension. But not rejection. At 10:11 a.m., I left the boardroom with the title intact. When I stepped back outside, the city noise felt different, sharper, not hostile, but aware. I drove home slower than usual, taking in the little things, the way Walter's old car hummed, the way the sun hit the driveway just before noon. But as I turned into the cul-de-sac, I knew something was wrong. My mailbox hung open, my porch light was smashed, and all 4 tires on Walter's car had been slashed. Pinned under the windshield wiper was a torn piece of yellow notebook paper. In thick black marker, it read, "You don't belong here." I didn't scream. I didn't call the police. I stood beside that slashed car in the dark, with the porch light broken and the note still fluttering under the wiper like a dirty little flag. I took it in my hand, creased, thick ink, uneven edges, and walked inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I didn't turn on any music. I didn't pour a drink. I just walked over to the mantel, where Walter's photo still sat in a brass frame. He was smiling in it, sun behind his head, shirt half wrinkled the way he liked it, sleeves rolled like he'd been fixing something. I placed the note beside the frame. Not under it. Not hidden. Let it be seen. I whispered aloud, not to him, but to the silence that had been filling the corners of the house lately. You married a man with enemies, Ivy, but none more dangerous than the ones who used to call him Dad. That night, I didn't sleep. I moved through the house slowly, switching off lights room by room. At one point, I picked up Walter's old sweater from the armchair and pulled it over my shoulders, not because I was cold, but because I needed to remember I still had armor. Not every battle is fought out loud. By morning, I was sitting across from Mitch Ainsley, Walter's estate attorney, in his wood-paneled office that still smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper. Mitch wasn't just a lawyer. He was the kind of man who still wore cufflinks and called my late husband Sir, even in private. He slid a folder across the table. These came in over the weekend. You'll want to see them. Emails, PDFs, timestamps, claims from Craig and Hannah's attorneys, submitted just days after Walter passed. They were suggesting a verbal amendment had been made. Supposedly, Walter had expressed an updated wish to restructure the trust, naming them both as primary beneficiaries and reducing my role to ceremonial guidance. I looked at Mitch. Did he? Mitch didn't flinch. He didn't even trust them with his calendar password. You think he'd trust them with the future of his name? I nodded, slowly, pressing the tip of my thumb against the folder's corner. They're forging the past now. Mitch leaned back. And doing it badly. I spent the rest of the morning at home, sitting at the kitchen counter, the note still laid out beside my tea, flipping through spreadsheets I hadn't touched since Walter's last round of chemo. I found something almost by accident. An invoice from a medical supplier we never used, cross-referenced with a disbursement from Walter's personal trust. I dug deeper. There was a trail, thin at first, then bolder the further I looked. Payments marked for medical support, redirected to a holding entity called Clearwater Advance. On paper, it looked legitimate, but the routing numbers didn't match any facility we'd ever worked with. And then I found Craig's name, not on the front, never that obvious, but in the documents registering Clearwater as a consultant vendor. His name showed up under Founding Advisory Contact. I sat back. Breath caught somewhere in my chest. It wasn't just greed. It was cowardice, dressed as care. A few hours later, I called the pharmacy Walter had always used. A friendly woman answered. I asked about Hannah's recent orders, anything she might have requested on behalf of her father during those final months. Nothing, the pharmacist said. We haven't seen Hannah in over a year. All of Walter's prescriptions came through you. So much for covering Dad's medications. By late afternoon, I was back on the phone. This time with the Family Foundation's accountant, Mr. Kenner. Calmly, I requested a full internal audit. Not as an accusation, but as a procedural review. I'm not saying anything's wrong, I told him plainly. But if there is, I want to be the one who finds it, quietly, before someone else does. There was a pause on the line. You sound different, Ivy, he said finally. I am. That evening, the garden lights flickered on as I stepped outside. The air smelled of mint and wet soil, Walter's favorite time to sit out here. I settled into the wooden bench near the hydrangeas, a soft ache in my chest. Then I opened a blank notebook. No logos, no lines, just a smooth page and a pen. At the top, I wrote, "This time, you don't stay silent." The letter wasn't for Craig, or Hannah, or even the board. It was for me. I wrote until my hand cramped. Tal, I gave them the benefit of the doubt for years. Let them laugh behind closed doors. Let them speak over me in public. Let them act like I was some accessory, some afterthought. I thought I was keeping peace. But peace doesn't come from silence. And now, I paused, took a deep breath, and kept writing. They've declared war, and I know how to win it. With truth. No screaming. No scenes. Just the truth, with receipts. They'll see who they're looking at. And maybe, just maybe, they'll finally see themselves. I didn't cry that night. I folded the letter, placed it in the drawer beside Walter's reading glasses, and climbed the stairs with steady feet. At 6:58 the next morning, I walked into Mitch's office again. In my hand, a navy blue folder labeled in clean, firm handwriting. Evidence. Private. By the time I handed the folder to Mitch and watched him scan its cover with a slow, careful nod, the sun had just begun warming the edge of the window panes. There was a stillness in the room, the kind that makes your heartbeat sound louder than it should. I didn't linger, just a quiet, "Let me know what else you need," before I stepped out of his office and drove home in silence. But peace doesn't last when your name is worth millions. The next morning, I woke to my phone vibrating furiously on the nightstand. Half asleep, I reached over and saw the barrage of texts from names I hadn't heard from in years. Some old friends, a few board members, and even Walter's college roommate. Then a voicemail from a local reporter. That's when I knew. I grabbed my robe and made my way downstairs, barefoot, kettle already hissing like it sensed the storm brewing. While the water boiled, I unlocked my tablet and opened the news app. Front page. Mystery widow controls fortune. Walter Morgan's children speak out. And there it was, my face, cropped from a charity gala years ago. Eyes half blinked, mouth mid-smile, frozen in a moment that no longer belonged to me. Beneath it, Hannah's face, softer than I remembered, posed, and Craig, arms folded, his expression sharpened just enough to look like the protective son. I scrolled down. Dad loved her, sure, Craig had told the reporter, but toward the end, he wasn't thinking clearly. He was isolated, manipulated. Hannah's quote hit harder. We always suspected she had a plan. A woman who comes into a man's life during a midlife crisis, then ends up with full control of the estate. That's not coincidence. That's calculation. I read the article 3 times, each word carving a little deeper. By the time my tea was ready, my hands were trembling so badly I spilled half the cup onto the counter. I didn't clean it up right away. Instead, I walked into the living room, sat down on the rug in front of the fireplace, and stared at the flames in Walter's wedding photo. "They're trying to rewrite you," I whispered, "and burn me in the process." Over the next 2 days, it only got worse. Walter's former business partner, Sam, who once toasted me at our anniversary party, called to delay our charity event. His voice was tight, uneasy. "Ivy, this is a mess. You know how donors get. One whiff of scandal and they start backing out." I tried to keep my voice steady. "There is no scandal." He sighed. "It's not about truth. It's about what sticks." Click. Others didn't even call. They just vanished. No emails, no confirmation notes, nothing. By Friday, I stopped answering altogether. I stayed in the house, barely showering, barely eating. When I did finally pick up a call, it was Mitch. "Ivy," he said gently, "don't read the comments section." Too late. People were tearing me apart online. Strangers debating whether I was a gold digger, a trophy wife, or some conniving mastermind. One comment read, "She probably has the will buried in her garden." Another said, "Wouldn't be the first time someone married into money and took over." I locked myself in the bathroom that night, sitting on the tile floor, my knees pulled to my chest. I hadn't cried since the funeral. But I cried then. Ugly, muffled sobs I didn't recognize as my own. The kind of tears that feel like your insides are being rearranged. "Is this what he meant?" I whispered to the cold porcelain, "when he said they'd come for blood?" There was no answer. Just the sound of the faucet dripping, steady and indifferent. The next morning, a small brown envelope was slipped under my front door. No return address, no note. Inside, a thumb drive. I plugged it into my laptop, hands still damp from washing dishes. The file was labeled only with a date, 6 months before Walter passed. My breath caught as I clicked it. His voice, strong, measured. "I'm updating the will today. Ivy's not just my wife. She's the only one I trust with this legacy. The kids mean well, but they don't understand what this family was built on. She does. She sees the whole picture." I closed the laptop and dropped to my knees. I clutched the edge of the table with both hands, trembling from the inside out. "You knew," I whispered. "You knew this day would come." By afternoon, I had forwarded the recording to Mitch with the subject line, "Truth." That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank document open and started typing. Not a sob story, not a confession, a statement. I laid out every key fact: dates, documents, recordings, the legal filings, their false claims, their timing, their motivations. At the very bottom of the letter, I added one final line. "This narrative will be corrected, with evidence, and with dignity." I didn't need to yell, I didn't need to accuse. I just needed the truth to outlive the noise. As the evening sky deepened into blue, I climbed the stairs and opened the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed. Inside, folded with care, was the scarf Walter gave me on our wedding day. Back then, it was just a soft token, a gesture of warmth for a chilly morning ceremony. But now it was armor. I wrapped it gently around my shoulders and looked at myself in the mirror. "He gave me this when the world laughed at us," I said softly. "I'll wear it when they try to destroy me." The next morning, I stepped onto the courthouse steps, wearing the scarf, and watched cameras turn toward me. The scarf warmed my shoulders as I moved up the granite steps. It didn't block out the camera flashes, the murmurs, the sharpness in the air, but it reminded me why I came, why I had to walk into that courtroom, no matter what they whispered. Inside, the air shifted. Quiet fell the moment the bailiff called the court to order. Wooden benches creaked as bodies settled. The smell of old paper and nervous cologne hung in the air. Craig sat stiffly across the aisle, one leg bouncing like he was holding back a speech. Hannah, she wouldn't even glance in my direction. She stayed perfectly still, jaw clenched, pearl earrings swinging with each subtle turn of her head. My lawyer, Mitch, leaned toward me. Stay steady. They're expecting a collapse. Give them the opposite. The judge, a woman with graying hair and the kind of voice that didn't tolerate nonsense, called the room to order. We'll begin with Mrs. Ivy Morgan's testimony. I stood. My palms were dry, but my heart pounded in the exact rhythm I remembered from the day I married Walter. Steady, determined, terrified, but proud. I took the stand, swore my truth, sat down. For a second, the courtroom blurred. So many eyes, too many. Then I spoke. I never asked for any of this, I began. I didn't marry Walter for his name or his money. I married the man who still brought me coffee in bed when he couldn't walk without a cane. There was a pause. A few heads turned. Someone coughed. I loved Walter for who he was when no one else would, I continued. And this attack on my character isn't just cruel, it's dishonest. I reached into my folder, unclipped the first stack of paper. These are letters Walter wrote me, long before any illness, dated in his handwriting. The clerk passed them to the judge. One by one, I read snippets aloud. Ivy, you make this world bearable. I don't trust many people, but I trust you. You've given me more than anyone in my own bloodline ever did. Each word chipped away at the narrative they'd built. Hannah shifted in her seat. Craig looked away. Then, I pulled out the final piece. I'd like to submit a voice recording, dated 6 months before Walter passed. Mitch placed the USB into the courtroom player. I waited. Then came his voice, clear, calm, deliberate. I'm updating the will today. Ivy's not just my wife. She's the only one I trust with this legacy. My kids, they think legacy means money. Ivy knows it means meaning. The courtroom was silent. The judge blinked slowly. And even the stenographer paused typing. I saw it, the flicker of truth landing where it needed to. But the silence didn't last long. Just as the judge nodded and asked the clerk to file the exhibits, Hannah stood. Her lawyer handed her something, thick paper, yellow edges, a gleam of confidence in the way she passed it forward. I have here, Hannah said, a signed prenup. My father insisted on one. Ivy agreed to it. This invalidates her entire claim. Murmurs broke out like a ripple across the room. Even the bailiff straightened. I stared at the document. It had my name. It had Walter's. It even had a date, one that coincided with our engagement. But I had never seen it before in my life. Mitch leaned over and whispered, "This is doctored. There's no notary, no witness line, nothing legal about it." I kept my gaze on the page as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we request immediate authentication." This document has glaring issues of validity. The judge nodded slowly, her voice calm but firm. The court will investigate this document's origins. Until then, it carries no legal weight. I exhaled, slow, measured, but inside I could feel the heat rise again, because this wasn't just about paper, it was about erasure. I turned to Hannah, and for the first time since Walter's death, I truly looked at her. She still wore the same smug restraint she always did, the same smugness I'd seen when she whispered across the Thanksgiving table that I was just playing house, the same tone she used when she'd called me a waitress pretending to be a wife. But this time, I didn't shrink. I leaned into the mic. "You've always seen me as temporary," I said, clearly. "Like a phase, an embarrassment, someone your father would outgrow." Her brow lifted, just a bit. But I was there when he fell, when he broke his rib and refused the hospital. I was the one who sat beside him every morning, reading him the paper out loud because he said he liked the sound of my voice. I looked around the courtroom, not at the cameras, not at the media, but at the people. The ones who had come to see the spectacle, and the ones who maybe didn't know what love looked like when it wasn't perfect. I stayed silent when you mocked my dress, when you rolled your eyes at how I held his hand in public. I stayed silent because I thought love didn't need defending. But I won't stay silent now. No one moved, no one interrupted, because they knew. This wasn't a fight over an inheritance. It was a fight over whether I belonged, and I wasn't asking anymore. Court adjourned just before noon. The gavel echoed like thunder. As we stepped outside, sunlight flooded the courthouse steps. My scarf, Walter's scarf, caught the breeze. Reporters surged. "Mrs. Morgan, how do you feel about the trial? Are you planning a countersuit for the forged prenup?" I paused, smiled just a little, and said, like I finally said what needed to be said, for me and for every woman they tried to silence. I didn't stay for the chaos. I got in the car. Rolled down the window. Let the air clear something in me. That night, just after brushing my teeth and turning off the kitchen light, I heard something slip against the door. A soft thud. I walked over, and there it was. An envelope. No name. No return address. Just tucked under the crack. Waiting. The envelope lay just inside my front door. Thin, white, and anonymous. I didn't remember hearing footsteps. Didn't see anyone through the peephole when I checked. Just that envelope. And something in my gut told me, this wasn't over. I locked the door behind me, turned every bolt, and walked it straight to the kitchen counter under the overhead light. For a moment, I just stood there. My daughter's laughter still echoed from down the hall, where she was brushing her teeth, humming some song from her tablet. Life, for her, was simple. Safe. I opened the envelope with a butter knife. A photograph slipped out. It was grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but the image was unmistakable. My stepdaughter, clutching her lunchbox, walking through the school's front gate. She was alone. Beneath it, a yellow post-it note. 5 words, scrawled in jagged handwriting. "You have a lot to lose." And beneath that, "Drop the case." I didn't sit. I didn't breathe. I just moved, grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and repeated the address like I was reading from scripture. The police arrived in 10 minutes. I handed over the envelope, the photo, the note, everything. One officer stood near the front window, eyes scanning the dark street. Another radioed in the incident. After they left, I went straight to my daughter's room. She was in bed, half asleep, her cheek pressed against a unicorn pillow. I didn't say a word. I just pulled the covers over her shoulder and lay beside her, one hand gently resting over her back. I stayed like that for hours, listening to her breathe, praying no one would ever take that away from me. And yet, sometime past midnight, I slipped out of bed and tiptoed toward Walter's study. That room, his sanctuary, was the one place in the house they hadn't touched. I needed something to steady myself, some echo of him that still felt solid. I sat at his desk. The lamp still had that faint scent of his cologne. I let my fingers drift across the wood surface, over old pens, over the edges of the leather blotter. My palm hit something, a slight ridge. I froze. There was a seam in the back panel of the desk, just behind the drawers, barely visible. I reached under it with my nails, tugged gently, and the panel popped loose with a soft snap. Inside, wedged between 2 wooden struts, was a small black USB drive. I stared at it for a full 30 seconds. No label, no markings. I carried it to Walter's old laptop, still stored on the lower bookshelf. The charger still worked. I plugged it in, heart thudding in my throat, and then the screen flickered. A video file loaded. I clicked play. Walter appeared. Dawn, he was sitting at this very desk. Same lamp, same blotter. But he looked tired, more frail than I'd ever seen him, his face gaunt, the skin under his eyes darkened. "If you're seeing this," he said slowly, "I'm already gone, and someone's trying to erase you." I pressed a hand to my mouth. My knees nearly gave out. Walter continued, "They'll twist my words, lie about what I wanted, about what we had. But Ivy, I saw what was coming, and I made sure there was a record. I changed the will. I had it notarized, filed, updated. You're the one I chose." He swallowed, eyes glassy but sharp. "Still, Walter, they never saw me as a man, just a vault with a pulse. But you," he gave a tired smile, "you saw me when I couldn't dress myself, when I forgot names. And you stayed." I didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit my wrist. "I wrote the letters. I told the lawyer. It's all on file. And if they're still trying to push you aside, don't you let them." His voice cracked. "Don't let them shame you into silence. You don't owe them dignity they never gave. The video ended. I sat back and just breathed. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't selfish. I wasn't what they painted me to be in court, in tabloids, in family whispers. I was his wife, the one he chose. And now, I had proof. By morning, I was at my attorney's office with a full file. Video drive, letters, handwritten dates, the last certified version of the will, a full forensic report on the forged prenup, with glaring inconsistencies in font, signature flow, and missing witnesses, and a police report for attempted intimidation involving a child. I want everything compiled, I told them. Chronological, certified, and loud. That afternoon, we filed a formal motion, fraud, harassment, and a supplemental exhibit, the flash drive. It would be played in court the next morning. We also hired private security, not just for me, for her, my daughter. I wasn't taking chances anymore. They came for me with greed, I told my attorney, folding my scarf with slow, careful hands. Now I come with truth. And that next morning, as I stepped into court, not as the widow they tried to silence, not as the woman they mocked, but as myself, Walter's words echoed through me like armor. You don't owe them silence. You owe yourself peace. And when that video played in court, you could hear a pin drop. The room didn't move, not when Walter's voice cracked near the end, not when the final frame froze with him smiling faintly, one shoulder slouched, the way he always did when trying to look tough. The courtroom stayed frozen for nearly 10 seconds, and in that kind of quiet, you don't just hear silence, you feel it, like pressure, like grief. Then the judge cleared his throat. I asked the gallery to remain quiet. Even his voice was softer than usual. Regina's attorney stood up, flustered, stammering something about inadmissible emotion and unverified motivations, but it was too late. My counsel already had the will, the notary logs, the security footage from the lawyer's office the day Walter submitted the revised paperwork, the digital timestamp from the USB, everything lined up. The so-called prenup? Completely discredited. The notary who signed it? Never existed. The witness line? Typed in. Even the formatting was off. Regina's copy used a font from a Microsoft update that hadn't existed when the alleged agreement was supposedly signed. It didn't matter how many times her lawyer flailed. The judge finally leaned forward. "Mrs. Ivy Ellington," he said, looking me directly in the eye, "you are hereby affirmed as the legal spouse and sole beneficiary of Mr. Walter Ellington's estate. All claims by the contesting party are voided. The forged prenuptial agreement will be submitted to the DA for formal investigation. Effective immediately, all occupants not recognized by this court must vacate the property within 72 hours. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I just nodded. But inside me, something loosened. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited like hungry birds. I didn't speak to them. I walked right past, chin lifted, coat buttoned to the top. Regina came chasing behind me, heels clapping on the sidewalk, voice shrill. "This isn't over, Ivy. You think a video makes you a saint? You think you deserve all this?" I didn't stop. Not even when she shouted again, "You were just a fling with a marriage license." Her son, her grown, smirking son who'd tried to move into my house like he'd built it, looked down at the sidewalk as if even he didn't believe her anymore. My attorney stepped between us and said, calm as ever, "Ms. Ellington, we advise no contact. She's under investigation now." "She can't touch you." Touch me? She tried to erase me. Now, 2 hours later, I stepped into the house they almost took from me. The living room was exactly as I'd left it, except emptier, cleaner, like all the pretending had been scrubbed out. I walked past the couch, past the silent fireplace, and paused. On the far bookshelf, behind a row of old cookbooks and a box of faded receipts, sat something I hadn't seen in years, a tiny ceramic bird. It was pale yellow, no bigger than a salt shaker, with one chipped wing. Walter had given it to me on a random Tuesday after I helped him file taxes and didn't complain once. "I saw this little guy and thought of you," he'd said. "Quiet, underestimated, and tougher than people think." I'd laughed at the time, called it tacky, maybe even rolled my eyes. But now I reached for it like it was gold. I set it gently on the mantel, right above the fireplace, and stood back. "You knew," I whispered. "You always knew." It stayed there like it had never been moved. 3 days later, I drove alone to the cemetery. The air was crisp. The grass was still damp from the night's rain. Walter's headstone sat beneath a small maple tree, its leaves fluttering in the morning light. I knelt and pulled my coat tight. "I didn't fight for the money," I told him. "I fought because you weren't here to say what needed saying. I fought because I wasn't going to be erased like I never existed." I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. I was tired. Deep tired. But not angry anymore. Just done. I laid a single flower against the stone. Nothing fancy. Just something soft. Simple. Something real. And then I heard footsteps. A moment later, my stepdaughter ran into view, hair bouncing under her knit cap. She nearly tackled me with a hug. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. She stepped back, holding my face in her small hands like only kids do when they're not afraid of anything. "You taught me what strong looks like." That cracked me. Not completely, but enough. Later that week, I opened the house for something simple, a dinner, nothing catered, nothing rehearsed. Just folding chairs, potluck dishes, and a few familiar neighbors who'd checked in when no one else had. They didn't ask for speeches, they didn't ask about court. But near the end of the night, as I refilled someone's coffee mug, a woman I barely knew leaned close and asked, "So, who are you, really?" I didn't hesitate. "Just Walter's wife," I said. "The one he chose when no one else believed I belonged." And that was enough. I never needed the spotlight, just the truth, just the place I earned, the life I built, the name I carried. Some fights aren't about proving others wrong. They're about proving to yourself you were never nothing to begin with. Have you ever had to fight just to prove you mattered? Would you have walked away or stood your ground like I did? Sometimes the loudest justice comes from silent endurance. And that little bird on the mantel, it still watches over us.